Everyone to the Tuesday, March 7th, Winchester Planning Board meeting. We have a quorum at the moment of 3. So why don't I, if we are being recorded via WinCam, thank you WinCam, as well as via Zoom. If you don't wish to appear or be heard, please turn off your video and mute your audio. Why don't I do a roll call vote? Let's see, Sally Dale.
Here.
Thank you. Itching Scott.
Hello, here.
Kurt, are you with us yet? I assume Kurt will unmute when he's back from his childcare duties, and Jerry's in here as well. We also have with us our recording secretary, Nancy Polcari, and Assistant Town Engineer Brian Mantor, and our liaison from the Chamber of Commerce, Richard Leaf. We also have a number of folks who are here for the hearing. So very quickly, updates. The town plan, last time this board voted to create a search committee for the town planner to review the applications which had been received. I'm happy to report that the chairs of the Historical Commission, Design Review Committee, and the Housing Partnership Board have all agreed to join Sally and I on that committee. I don't have the exact date for the first meeting or the only meeting. I hope it shouldn't take more than one meeting to go through my applicants. The other thing of note is that the MBTA Section 3A working group will be meeting in very early April. There was a slight delay in terms of getting some of the data they needed to do their work in order to look at different densities and our zoning, and so that'll happen then. One of the things coming up, of course, is the town election on the 18th. I believe it's the 18th. It's a Saturday, I believe. Yep. The other thing is that the ability of this board to be remote only, the state, I don't know if it was a law or a decree, whatever it is, it will expire on March 31st. However, I had a quick question of town council, and town council says that there are things in motion at the legislative level to hopefully extend that, hopefully permanently. So that is all I have for updates. Anyone else have anything to say? It's wide open.
I think the one thing would be good to make sure that people know about upcoming dates. Is that something to do in updates or
Sure.
later?
Date is in the word update.
So let me just jump to my view of the I'm sorry, maybe I don't have it handy. There's a lot of meetings coming up, and I wanted to make sure maybe they're in. I don't think I put them in the PB calendar. I wasn't thinking about that one. We have well, the MIPC meeting is coming up on Thursday afternoon for people who are interested in that. And then there's a thing in the way.
That's
sorry.
the MP. That's the master plan implementation.
I did mean to say MPIC. I'm really sorry.
No, that's okay. Just for those who don't know what that abbreviation is, in any case, MPIC. Yes, we're meeting with the sustainability director on Thursday.
Right, and then we're meeting with. I guess Diab, you and I are getting a meeting. We have a meeting with MAPC on the 13th in advance of the community meeting that's on April 4th.
Actually, it's in advance of the meeting with the planning board on the 28th with Josh Fiala.
You mean the 21st? The 28th, there's no meeting?
The 21st, thank you.
And the flyer for that April 4th event, April 4th, came to Diab and me today. And he asked for ideas on distributing it. I did forward it to Rich Rohan, who lives near and in that area, and he's distributing it in advance of us having a more robust idea of how we're going to get that flyer out. And then I have a phone meeting tomorrow with the historic preservation architect, consulting historic preservation architect, to find out what she might propose as a scope of services for, or to agree on a potential scope of services for her to provide the planning board with independent design advice on the 1016 Mount Vernon exterior changes. That meeting, and then I proceed from there with Diab and so on to figure out what the next steps are.
Yeah, that project 1016 Mount Vernon is going before the Disability Access Commission this Thursday.
Excellent.
And I did get a call from John Levitt today, which I didn't get a chance to return. Presumably he wants to know what to do with that, but we'll get to that. I'll call him tomorrow.
Right. And then I am, but going back to the Master Plan Implementation Committee, I'm meeting with the youth representative, Dylan Ketterer. I think it's later this week, to brainstorm how to get more citizen awareness of the Master Plan Implementation Committee, the Master Plan, and the Master Plan Action Plan. And that was an assignment coming out of that little working group. And then, Iching and I are working on the Mass Builds database that needs to be populated. It's something that the town hasn't done, I think, since 2020. But then again, we did have a pandemic since 2020. And I've put together some of the data they're looking for. I think I sent it to Brian Manter, I'm not sure. And Iching is also populating another whole category of, or drawing from another whole category of data. So that's one update. This is what it looks like right now. And down this left side, you can see the properties that are in the database so far. I think there's 12 of them. Some of them go back. I think the purpose of this database is to report, to have a very live, real-time picture of what's under construction in terms of housing in Massachusetts. Maybe mixed use and housing, I think.
And I think we have scheduled for the 21st a presentation by you, Chair, if I am correct.
We do. So we'll talk about that then. And then that's it. That's all I have. I'm sorry.
No, that's great. Thank you much. There was one other thing that you and Iching are still working on the dog grooming.
Dog groomer thing. Yes. And I started working late into the night last night on a memo, and then I got exhausted. And then I woke up this morning and I said, well, that was stupid. Just what it was is I wanted to tell you the research that I found from the other towns, and then just say, this is what I recommend that we do. And Iching and I haven't even had a chance to confer on this yet, but
yeah, we do have, we did get a letter from someone who wishes to start, who's interested in a business in the downtown, in the center business district. And I know that this board had previously discussed allowing it as a special permit underneath, I think it was either personal or general services. So
I think we were going to put it under personal services.
Yeah. So we should, I will send.
Oh, right. I was going to write that up as a motion, I guess, for the next meeting.
Well, we'll have that on our agenda for next meeting.
All right, good. Okay, great.
So I think that's pretty much it.
Would you guys be able to have a hard date for when you and the Historical Commission or the chairs and the Design Review Committee to meet for the town planner position? Because I think that, it would be nice.
I can give you a hard date right now if I can find the email. I've never seen the email that is about the scheduling of this meeting, and I'm the only one that didn't respond. I'm looking for it now.
It would have gone out last Saturday, and I now suddenly realize that we're 4 minutes over. We're past our time. I mistakenly thought that I was off. So why don't we
Did it
we
go
have-
to my town email, do you think, or my Gmail account?
Why don't we
deal with it
come
later.
back to that, because we're a minute away from our hearing. So why don't we move our
Yep.
review of our minutes until then? And because we are right at 7:15. So why don't we're going to reopen the hearing on Rocky Ledge subdivision. So can I get Kurt, are you with us? Sorry, we're still missing.
I am just, I need like 2 more minutes, but I am here.
Okay, good. So Kurt is with us. So there's so everyone else is here. So why don't we do I have a motion to reopen the hearing for Rocky Ledge subdivision?
So moved.
Okay, Sally, you need to turn your mic on and then you can second.
Second,
Okay, roll call vote, please. I-Ching,
Aye.
Sally,
aye.
and say aye as well. Welcome, everyone. And I believe we have with us from the Rocky Ledge folks, we have Ricky Belago. I'm sorry, I think I messed up your last name there. I apologize. Mark Vaughn. I thought we had, oh, there you are, Brian Tim. And Nick Pratt and Tom Mahoney, are you part of the team, or are you folks just onlookers from the neighborhood?
I think they're more
Just an onlooker here, unless there's any questions I need to answer, I'm here if I can be helpful.
And you are with?
I'm Tom Mahoney, sorry.
Yes, and oh, I see. You're the
Mahoney's.
Mahoney's. Okay, right. Okay. And then Brian Manter is, I think, going to lead the charge this evening, because this is really all about the engineering and the review by Weston Sampson. I know, Mark, that you're only able to be with us very short time this evening, so let's jump right into it.
Sure. Yeah, if I have to, I may need to jump off shortly if I'm sitting at Burlington Town Hall for another hearing here. But so I know that communicating with Brian Manter, the peer review is underway and whatnot, but can certainly have Brian speak to that. And
okay, and so the only administrative thing is, depending upon the conversation today, we may have to ask for another extension just to make sure that everything works out. And I think we're extended until the 21st at the moment.
I think we had extended to the 28th.
The 28th,
Mr.
okay.
Chairman, based on your meeting schedule that you just had up on the screen, and it may be appropriate to continue until that April 4th meeting, perhaps, because I know in talking to Manter, it might take another week or two for the water and sewer peer review to come in. And, our thought was that we would respond to that and then hopefully come in one more time to the planning board to have everything sewn up as best as possible. But we'll defer to you and Brian on that. So.
Okay, well, thank you for your flexibility on that. So why don't we dive right into the review? Brian Manter.
Thank you, Mr.
Engineers
Chair.
should stop calling themselves Brian. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Brian Manter. It's your show.
Us engineers like to confuse things for sure. Well, thank you, Mr. Vaughn. Yeah, I wanted to just take today to kind of update everyone where the status of the peer review is. It's ongoing. There's 3 major phases to it: stormwater, sewer, and water. The stormwater had an initial kind of preliminary review, and RJOC has responded to that. I believe Weston Sampson has the information that they need to finalize that aspect of the review. They anticipate that aspect of the review will be done by the end of the week. The sewer aspect of the review, preliminary findings is that they're seeing that the system has capacity in the line for the additional flow that will be generated from the subdivision. And they anticipate having their review and findings done by the end of the week as well. The third component is the water component. The key driver for that one was to conduct a flow test to measure how much pressure and flow the system can provide up in that area. Unfortunately, there was a water leak in that neighborhood, which delayed the flow test maybe 2 weeks now. Brian, maybe you can refresh my memory. I think that's about right. The flow test is scheduled for this Thursday at 11. Representatives from RJOC will be there with Weston Sampson and the engineering department. And so once they have that data, they should complete their analysis by March 17th. The engineering department team will also have their analysis and review completed as well at that time. And so at this stage, I feel that, you know, hitting that deadline of March 28th is not gonna, it won't allow enough dialogue between the town, the applicants on these findings, and give the applicant fair time to respond to some of the findings that Weston and Sampson's made. So I feel that if the applicants can afford an extra couple weeks, that should allow everyone to complete their reviews and comments and wrap up the design.
Okay, are there any particulars that you think should be brought to the board's attention at this point?
Not yet. I don't think so, no.
Okay, well, this may be a really short hearing. Brian, Tim, do you have any concerns about that schedule from your point of view?
Not from my point of view at all. You know, I have been in touch with Brian Manter throughout the process. And, you know, I think we're in good communication. And as Brian mentioned, we don't anticipate foreseeing any major issues coming up here. I think Brian will agree with that as well. The preliminary findings seem pretty consistent with our expectations.
Okay, so why don't I'm going to jump to my calendar here to see whether I can figure out what the right date is for this. Currently, I have a planning board meeting I should start worrying about. So we have a meeting on the 21st. And then we have a meeting on the 4th. Let me just see what's on the agenda for the 4th. Oh, the 4th is kind of tight because we start at 8, because we have and we've got a hearing. We have a hearing on 10 to 16 Mount Vernon. Is the 4th too soon after the 20th, do you think, or should we go 2 weeks after that?
If that's going to me, just as the site civil and design engineer, I feel very confident that getting these peer reviews and comments by the end of next week at the latest. Brian's very available to go back and forth. I know we've worked out very well on this project and others as well. So I feel confident that we could wrap this up, hopefully, for that. I don't know about yourself, Brian.
Yeah, not knowing what I'm confident we'll be able to work through all any findings. You know, so far, I think everything that Weston Sampson has observed, had made comments on, were, you know, addressed by RJOC, and that were by no means anything that would put the brakes on anything. However, without seeing, you know, the meat of the 2 of the 3 reports, you know, and having a dialogue and a back and forth dialogue, I do think that does take a little bit of time. It's not just the review, but it's the communication. Like, you lose a day here, you lose a day there, and those days can add up. So it's, I'd feel more comfortable if we could push it to the 11th. I think that would allow enough flexibility and losing a couple days here and there for whatever reason.
That actually kind of makes sense to me, because I think I want to give this board time to, you know, if we need to meet on, you know, let's assume we might, I hope we only have one more go around, but let's say we have 2 go rounds before this board. So that would be, if you folks could present on the 4th, and then we can, if we extend this to the 11th, that gives us a little bit of buffer in case we need to move to have a hearing, 2 hearings in the next month. So if it's okay, with you folks, I would ask for an extension until April 11th. And I think hopefully that gives us enough time to do everything we need to do. So,
But just to be clear, Mr. Chairman, are you, would you be continuing the hearing though until April 4th? And
I
then
think we would,
we
yes, we
would-
would continue it till the 4th. Because then we could listen, we could get the engineering input. And then, but just in case we need to come back for the final discussion on the 11th.
And the one question I would have on that, if we do have that extra week and if things do go well, and I know you don't have a town planner on board, you know, it's obvious, could we have a draft decision maybe to review or anything to that respect? I don't know what you feel about that with Mark as well.
Well, we could, I think the board would discuss it on the 4th, and having a draft decision before the 4th, it's a possibility. To be honest, I'm running a little low on bandwidth.
I could imagine, yeah.
So we should, you know, that's something that we can aspire to, but
I'm going to leave in a minute here, but Mr. Chair, but I'd be happy to work with whomever in that regard too. I mean, not trying to overstep my bounds in any manner, but if it's helpful to put a draft together that you and Brian Manter could look at and vet appropriately, then that just.
okay, yeah. So why don't you and Sally and I meet, we'll set up a meeting to discuss what we, you know, something that could go into a draft. We'll pass it around to the planning board so that they have some insight into that before the 4th. Obviously it's just, it would have to go through the standard discussion and vote. But let's plan, let's get an extension to the 11th, and we will continue the hearing until the 4th, and hope that everything goes well. So.
Okay, I'm going to jump off. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So I'll reach out to Mark. I know last time he wrote us a memo giving us an extension until the 28th. So we'll ask for another memo to extend until the 11th. And then
Question, Deb?
Yeah.
What is a draft decision? It sounds not a decision if it's a draft.
No, it would just set a framework. And so it's something, I mean, I think the idea is that we could think about what the conditions would be on this project, if any. We would get input from Brian Manter in terms of what sort of engineering conditions there would be.
Okay, now I understand. Thank you.
Yeah, so it's
I get it.
not, it's
Right.
just, you know,
It's an outline of the issues that would be addressed within the decision itself.
yes. So
Thank
that
you. Very
when
helpful.
we meet on the 4th, we have a framework for discussion, and we can always amend it.
Yep. Got it.
Okay, so Ricky, you are the person controlling the reins on this project, right? So is it okay with you if we have an extension until the 11th?
Yeah, no, that's perfect.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay, so could I get a motion to continue the hearing on the Rocky Ledge subdivision until, why don't we say, just so we can actually start at 7:15 next time, why don't we say 7:45 on April 4th?
So moved.
Oh, wait a second. Let me make sure that we actually, I think we might actually have a hearing for Mount Vernon's.
I think we do have a hearing for Mount Vernon Street. Let me jump in.
It's at 8:15. So why don't we're going to have to do this later. So why don't the hearing for Mount Vernon, I think, is going to be a in-depth hearing. So I think we're going to have to give it at least an hour. So why don't we, and it's at 8:15. So why don't we, let's give it an hour. So that's 9:15.
Okay,
So 9:15 on April 4th. And if you could move that one, Kurt?
So moved.
Okay, is there a second on that?
I'll second it.
Okay, roll call vote, please. Sorry, there's too many people on here. Kurt,
Aye.
Sally,
Aye.
Yi Ching,
Aye.
and I say aye as well. Okay, excellent. So this, the hearing is continued until April 4th at 9:15. Thank you, everyone from the development team. Thank you, Brian Mancher, for working this through, and I think we're in good shape right now. So why don't we jump back to reviewing the minutes, since our next we have half an hour to review minutes. And if I could, let me see if I can contact Sue Carney and see whether or not she can show up earlier. Are there any comments or concerns about the minutes?
So, Dia, I don't know if I got these minutes. I've been looking for them.
They are in the packet.
The packet for today's meeting.
Yes.
I had a couple of comments. I could start. Or do you want to delay this so that?
No, we've got a half an hour. I should be able to find it and read it in a half an
Can
hour.
you scroll to the top, please, Yi Ching?
Please.
This is for Tuesday, February the 21st. So this was 2 weeks ago.
Right.
Okay. And I know, Nancy, you had some questions on last week's, and I apologize I haven't gotten back to you yet. I will do that forthwith. So go ahead.
Yes, so on page 2 about regarding the 1016 Mount Vernon Street, I remember there being a pretty lengthy discussion about the second means of egress going over the top of somebody else's roof, and I don't see that in here. So I just want to remember it for the next time when we talk about it.
Do you want to add that to is that something you think should be in the minutes, the little?
Correct, just like a bookmark to refer back to it. It was a pretty long discussion.
Okay, so maybe that's something that should be put in there. So if you could make a note of that and send that to Nancy to include that discussion.
Right.
That is something that I recall making a note of, because I was going to talk to the building department and legal about what you do with easements like that.
Mm-hmm. The other comment I had was for 14 Thompson Street, and I think on the motions, this last motion, instead of eliminating the overhead hardware over the panels, I remember saying we we landed on decreasing the hardware rather than eliminate totally. You remember that?
Yeah.
So I would say instead of eliminate, I think it was decrease or decrease the. I don't know the exact word.
Reduce the visual impact of it. I think was one way of doing that. This actually leads to an update that Sally and I forgot to give you, because we did get a revised drawing from the applicants to see whether it met with this board's decision in terms of reducing it. And so Sally and I felt that it should, they moved that barn hardware down to make it more in line with the windows on the neighboring, but they didn't actually reduce its impact. So we suggest.
Well, they made them narrower. They did not make them taller, but they made the bar, shorter, but they made the bar slightly less high. And I believe your recommendation was going to be to ask them to find a less massive hardware bar. Searched on the internet, there's lots of choices.
Yeah, so they address their concerns about the panels. The panels are narrower to the extent that we asked them to do so. But just the heaviness of the bar was still an issue. So I haven't heard back from them. But I'm sorry that was sort of out of nowhere. I apologize.
That's all I had.
Okay. Any other comments on this?
Well, I have no comments because I have not been able to find today's packet anywhere in any of my emails. So I have no comments.
Okay, do you want to,
Kelly, do you want me to email it to you?
That might be helpful. Sure. I don't know why I didn't get it. I've just looked everywhere.
Yeah, I can do that.
Oh, wait. Supporting agenda with supporting documents. I finally,
yep, that's
thank
the
you
one.
for offering. I think I have it now. Gee whiz. Not good.
So, our 8 o'clock, Foreman Place has, I let them know that we're running a bit early, so, it's possible they could start a little early. And I still haven't found Sue Kearney's, phone number to let her know that we were running.
It should be on her form, is it not? 617?
Oh, let's not read it out. I have a feeling she probably wouldn't want everyone to know what her phone number is. I didn't even think about that. Silly me. That was not very smart of me. Okay.
Yeah, it is right in the packet there. Yeah.
Okay. Well, please let's not show everyone a phone number. You should probably leave that from me. It's in the packet sheet. Okay. I'm sorry, Sue. I think I messed up on that. Forget when you don't have a town plan. Nothing like dead space and meaning.
It's not dead for me because I'm reading.
Okay.
Oh, you guys can do.
Well, I'm gonna send Sue. I'll let her know we're actually running early.
Yeah, I have no problems with these minutes, Diab, so I'm sorry to just delay the meeting. Can do
Okay,
it.
so why don't, we've got a couple comments from I Ching. I Ching, if you would, pass those on to Nancy so that they get revised. So is there a motion to approve the minutes of Tuesday, February 21st, 2023 as revised?
So moved.
And is there a second?
Second.
Oh, second. Okay, roll call vote, please. Sally Dale,
I,
I Ching Scott,
Aye.
Kurt,
Aye.
and Diab says aye as well. Thank you very much. Thank you, Nancy. Now we have about 20 minutes. We do have Michael Lang and John Rufo from Foreman Place. I do have a text from Nancy, and she says, oh, not Nancy, Sue Kearney. Sue Kearney says, okay. So, Michael and John, thank you for showing up early. We are trying to squeeze a person in early as well. Hopefully they can join us. Once they join, it'll take about 5 minutes. It's just to appoint someone to a committee. And after that, we can dive in early.
Sounds good. Great.
Yeah. Very unusual that we're ahead of schedule and just, really, oh, there we go. Okay, so we have with us Sue Kearney. Sue, if you want to turn on your mic and
okay.
There you go. Excellent. So Sue Kearney has responded to our invitation for a volunteer to join us on the Master Plan Implementation Committee. Sue, you want to give us a real quick introduction to yourself and why you would love to be on this committee?
Okay. I live on 9 Winchester Street. I moved to Winchester in 1980. 84 and went back to school. I did a program through a trauma radiology program at Mass General for 2 years. And so after working at Mass General for about 25 years, I stopped to raise my children. So I've lived in town currently for, it's 40 years. So throughout the years, I did a lot of volunteer. You know, I volunteered at the high schools, at all levels, elementary, middle school, high school. And I got to know a lot of people, very interested in community. One of the things I did work on was the newsletter, and which I found, especially at the high school level. And actually the format that they're using today, that Robin Wolf and I set up, they're still using, which we think is pretty interesting. But I'm interested in so I know where Winchester's been since I've lived in town since 1984, and I see where it's going. And I think I can add a lot to the community aspect, helping out, you know, how could I say this? Kind of add to it in the sense of, in a positive way, how to, you know, build community in a positive way.
Mhm.
I'm not sure what else. Do you have any questions?
Yeah, that would be the next thing. Does anyone have any questions of Sue?
So Sue, my question would be, what are some of the favorite things that you like to do that you imagine the work of this committee would involve? And if you don't imagine what it would be, we can talk a little bit about what that is. But having been on other committees and stuff, what's the favorite role or part that you like?
Probably working on the community aspect of
like you said. Okay,
right, bringing people together, and I think there's a lack of, you know, between the younger generation, you know, middle, and then the older. I think we need to somehow bring all those groups together, and I think this town is divided in a lot of different ways.
Well, I think from my perspective, the Master Plan Implementation Committee is a perfect platform for exercising those skills and reaching for solutions to those problems. So I think that's great.
Well, you know, for example, you know, many years ago, my kids graduated from the high school in 2010 and 2017. But a little before that, you know, the youth center at McCall just went away. And I think we've lost that. I know the Jenks Center does the high school. Jenks Center works with some of the schools to bring people together. But I know the community is more of that, but I think it's baby steps. I mean, I see a lot of things that I don't like in the direction the town is going in. And I see a lot of division that makes me sad. I hope I answered your question.
Well, you have. I think there are a lot of strategies in the Master Plan Action Plan that are opportunities to erase divisions and bring people together. So
yeah, I've read through most of it.
Yeah, bringing that strength to this working committee, this advisory committee, would be great, as far as I'm concerned. I'm thrilled for by your interest.
Yeah, I think I can bring a lot to some of those areas.
Great.
Thank you. Any other questions? If not, then I think we just have to take a real quick vote. And then is there a motion to, what is the word I'm looking for?
I would move to appoint Susan Carney to the Master Plan Implementation Committee. One of the awkward things about this is that we don't know whether it's a 1 year, 2 year, or 3 year term, because the way that we had envisioned for filling out the committee did not pan out. So I don't know how to add that to my motion, except to say, Sue, how about if you go on as a 3 year member?
that would be fine. I think that makes more sense.
So
Okay.
can I say as a 3-year member?
Sure.
Okay, that's in my motion.
And Sue, of course, you can decide not to go all 3 years if it turns out that you don't want to.
I'll second the motion.
Excellent. Roll call vote then.
Thank
Eugene,
you.
Aye.
Sally,
Aye.
Kurt,
Aye.
and Dibbs is aye as well. Welcome, Sue. I think there is something that we
Thank you,
need
Sue.
need to get you
Thank you.
to meet with the town clerk. I think there's some sort of magic incantation that has to be done. I don't know what it is, but we'll let Mary Ellen know, and we'll make sure that that all goes through. But thank you very much.
Thank you. I know I have a lot to learn, and there are a lot of areas that I'm not familiar with, but I'm willing to step up and learn.
Very much appreciated. Really welcome you, and we'll see you this Thursday in our meeting with Sustainability Director. So.
Oh, that's right. We're doing the Zoom call.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
Sue?
So let us move on a little early, but early is good, to our discussion with Michael Lang and John Ruffo of Foreman Place about their work that they've been done on the Upper North Main Street.
Oh, I wanted to listen. Okay.
So why don't you guys go ahead? Michael and John, welcome.
Thank you, Deb. Yeah, we're excited to be here, and we're looking back at our previous presentations, realizing some of you we haven't spoken with since the fall, which is amazing how time flies. But in any case, we have been working with Deb and Sally on helping to formulate the direction for the northern section of the corridor. So again, I'm Michael Wang with Foreman Place. We're a small architecture and urban planning firm based in Newton, and I'm joined by my partner, John Ruffo. And do I have the capability to share, Diab, I assume? It says disabled, but.
Yes, you will, as soon as I remember to do that. And if you see me disappear from the screen, it's because I have to finish dinner. So just, I'm still there.
Okay. That looks good.
Okay.
I think I've
Go
got
for
it. All right. Can folks see my screen yet? Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Great. Well, so I'm going to run through this presentation, and John will offer color when appropriate, and others can interrupt if need be. But this is like our our presentation in the fall on the southern end, which was Clark to Skillings. We have a lot of content here, and so I'm going to try to sort of breeze through some of it, but we can always revisit or a separate meeting, even whatever. But I just want to try to get all this out, and hopefully we'll have time for some comments. I'm going to leave it not in presentation mode, just so the whole image appears. So I hope that works okay. I have just a handful of slides that just to remind us where we were when we last were looking at things in the fall on the southern end. And we had sort of taken this three-pronged approach to some of our work over the course of the last year, looking at sort of the development, potential future development parcels along the corridor, looking at the quality of the public realm in terms of what could be done to enhance streetscapes, and then also, expanding that into sort of ideas about complete streets. We had shared some imagery about what the corridor might look like using a SketchUp model with revised sidewalk edges and crossings, etc. This is just a quick review, and I think this was the area where we really wanted to focus. And that quote at the top there, I think, puts it back into the context of this study being one that is building on the 2030 master plan, which identified evolving opportunity areas, of which North Main Street is one. And then subsequently, the 2021 MAPC study, corridor study, which identified a number of potential variables. So I think this idea of creating a framework that incentivizes the desired approach to future development along the corridor is critical to what we're trying to do here in terms of not only the mix of uses, but appropriate scale and character and other aspects of potential future development, which ultimately can be governed or controlled to a degree through design guidelines, integral into whatever zoning amendments might occur. And the new layer that's come on top of that are the MBTA communities requirements. And as we discussed, I think last time, the southern end, basically from Clark Street south, is all within the half-mile radius from the station. So the focus of many of those studies on the southern end, which let me just keep moving the slides here. This is our first, these are the MAPC diagrams from the 2021 study. And we were looking at opportunities, parcels and their likelihood for change, where historic assets were, and what the two zoning districts were. They have slight variations in certain things like use. So in our first study, we had worked to consolidate a few particular parcels that we wanted to do a study on, and provided a number of different approaches, including ones that had mixed use, as you see in a lot of these, red being, these are ground floor plans on these various parcels, red being retail commercial space, and the dark blue and the light blue being residential uses. So we did do studies that also were purely multifamily residential in order to see what was sort of the comfortable we could achieve on some of these parcels, which vary in size. Partial acres to 3+ acres. So in any case, I'm going to go back and revisit that because Sally, you asked us to give you sort of a range of what the unit counts were that we have achieved with some of these studies, as well as the resulting densities. But anyway, that's just a review of where we were. And now shifting to the north, and what's interesting is looking at this section from Clark all the way up to the town line at Cross Street. This is essentially a little more than 2/3 of the corridor. So our study last fall, if you will, was for sort of less than 1/3 of the corridor. So this last piece we were biting off was quite a bit, and so we've tried to get to a similar level, but it was a lot of stuff to take on. In any case, working with Diab and Sally, we were able to sort of identify 8 different parcels that we thought would be representative of different conditions along the northern stretch of the corridor. And they differ in size. Obviously, they differ in shape, some of them being quite skinny, the parcels 7 and 8, and 2 for that matter. And then in locations, and some of them are on important intersections like parcels 6 and 7 at the junction of Swanton and Main Street, and there are other many other aspects and variables that are involved in. I think this is a nice collection and a range of parcel types. We also, the focus of the test fits on this end of the corridor, I think perhaps is less MBTA communities centric, in that we weren't doing purely multifamily. We're talking about how do we want the corridor to be shaped? What do we want the corridor to feel like? The current zoning in the GBD3, which is the northern part of the corridor, has different ideas about setbacks, and retail is currently not allowed as of right. So there are a number of things that exist today, and not a lot of non-conforming things as well, but there are a number of theories in the zoning today that may not be consistent with what the future vision for this part of the corridor is. So there was a slightly different focus. And for example, on parcel 1, as you'll see, we did actually a commercial retail approach to that, as opposed to a mixed use or multifamily approach. So anyway, that's a little bit of an overview. And at the same time, on a sort of parallel track, we've been kind of collecting variables for design guidelines and zoning framework. We often think about these on sort of 3 different scales and things that future development might want to contribute to at the corridor level, like block structure, facade length and ground floor articulation, and then things at the site level, such as the building's relationship to the streetscape, how parking is handled, et cetera. And then at the building level as well, when you get into sort of architectural character and facade design, et cetera. I think these studies really do focus on this middle category of sort of site relationships. So you'll see, and this next slide kind of reveals that, there's some potential ideas about changes that could impact future development, and things that seem to be a constant themes coming up on each of these studies were things like setbacks. Should there be a requirement for a 15-foot minimum front setback? Well, probably not a blanket a beneficial approach for the between Swanton and Cross, all the way for all different types of uses and et cetera. And for height, there's been some similarly with density. I think height, there's been an assumption to start that perhaps the northern end would want to be maybe a little less dense or less like 3 stories, as opposed to some of the studies we did on the southern end that were offering 4-story alternatives to things. So these again are just a framework for these studies. I always like to say the studies that you're going to see are not actually recommended development strategies, but rather they are ways of uncovering which variables and design guidelines and things will ultimately help you achieve the type of feeling on the corridor that you're looking for. So anyway, this is an extended preamble here, but I think frontage build out is an important thing in terms of creating a street wall, and parking is another very important factor. And in the southern end of the corridor, in those studies, we were using the CBD parking ratios of 0.75 per dwelling unit and 0.75 per 1,000 square feet of retail. And the question is, should that be the same for the northern section if we're trying to achieve things like no parking in front and certain landscaping buffers, et cetera, for side and rear parking? So anyway, you'll see that these test fits kind of show you what kinds of parking ratios are doable based on the mix of uses on these particular sites. So anyway, that's a little bit of a framework. So I'm going to start with these 3 parcels in the middle of the northern section of the corridor. Number 3 is the first one here, and that's the Verizon building. And in each of these, I'm going to show you kind of an aerial and a GIS map of the site, just to make sure everybody knows where we are and feels oriented. But if you're lost, I don't know, I can't see too many hands, but anyway, that's where we are.
Just a quick question. That's Glenwood right there, right? Glenwood Street, right at the top of your red line.
Yeah. Yep. That's right. And Hemingway down here. Yep. And then that shows up. Well, no, I don't have that on this one. I apologize. Anyway, I've got too many people, too many faces blocking my view of my notes here. So parcel 3, we took a look at a test fit that had ground floor retail, a 3-story building with 2 levels of residential above. This is not an uncommon approach to some of the studies we did at the south end. You can see we're trying to have the retail in the most visible location on the corner, and trying to think about what the quality of the ground floor plane could be with residential amenities and residential lobby, also in a more prominent location. But lots of decisions made with each of these studies. And in this case, we placed the building with a 15-foot setback, which is what's required today. But you could argue that, is that really the right thing for commercial uses because the setback is from the property line, and in many cases you have a considerable sidewalk depth on top of that. So if you're trying to allow space for outdoor dining, that can be a positive thing. But all these can be shifted around, and you'll see some of these we've placed either on the property line with zero setback, and in other cases we've done 5 to 10 feet. So this just gives you, in every case, we're playing with the variables to kind of try to give you a range of the impacts and things to think about. In any case, you can see a typical floor plan above in the lower left here. And so we're achieving 53 residential units plus the ground floor retail space. And you can park this intensity of use, but only if you're using the CBD ratios. So that's the catch here. We're still looking at the 0.75 spaces per dwelling unit. Now, this is all a question about, we're not half a mile from the station, but this is a potentially active transit corridor. So these are the kinds of decisions we'll need to revisit as we go through, and you're going to see a range here. So I'm just going to keep moving because I know I want to leave time for people to, I don't want to get too in depth. So across the street here, the large office building that does not, that skews geometrically from the street and has parking in front, things that I think we're trying to revisit. A first inkling was, is there something we could do to potentially address the street edge and get some of this parking off the street? And so we looked at a couple of different alternatives here of introducing some residential along Hill Street and marking the corner, but it just seemed like these were not synergistic with this existing office building. And so we really didn't pursue this further. The idea of having residential liner is something that will be useful in other sites, I think, but we decided to just see what the capacity of the site was if we just utilize the whole site here. And again, this is not saying that this is a likelihood that this is going to happen. This is just saying that this is an example of development capacity on a particular site that will hopefully inform decisions about design guidelines, et cetera. So what you have here is an L-shaped mixed-use building, again with ground floor retail, perhaps restaurant, and then 2 levels of residential above. You also have a liner of townhouses that provides a little bit of protection to the residential on Russell, the loop. And so what this results in is a total of 72 residential units, which, given the size of the site, is achieving a 22 dwelling units per acre density, which is not at the high. That's sort of at the low end of what we've been achieving on the corridor, particularly on the larger sites. So it felt like this wasn't really pushing the envelope enough. It was very comfortably parked, et cetera, with 2 parking spaces per dwelling unit plus the allowable commercial retail ratios that exist today. So we went one step further and introduced, we changed the nature of the townhouses so that each townhouse has a duplex over a duplex, and we added another block of townhouses to the back of the site, reducing some of the parking and adding more units. And this gets up to 92 units. And you can see now the density is approaching 30 dwelling units per acre, which is closer to some of the things we were achieving on the southern end. But again, on the southern end, when we got really high with the densities, it's because we were doing multifamily only as opposed to the mixed use solutions. So just for point of clarification there. But I think this does some nice things in terms of creating a street frontage and imagining that being an active street frontage. There's opportunities for outdoor dining. And this is a series of diagrams over on the left here that is from the hybrid form-based code that we did for Meriden, Connecticut a number of years ago. And these are some of the diagrams that were in the zoning code at that point that we added, such as how do you want to site a building on a given site, and it's relative to the primary street and the secondary street that in this case, and obviously the preferred solution is to mark the corner and to have a decent amount of street wall frontage, as opposed to having the building sitting at the back of the site with parking in front, which is kind of what exists here today. So there are resulting percentages that one might find, and this is the kind of thing we can finesse, but somewhere in the 50 to 75% range for frontage build out is, can be desirable depending on the uses and the quality of the corridor you're trying to achieve. This is a representative of a 71% frontage build out. So that just gives you a sense of that variable and how that could come into play. Oops. Okay. The third one here is parcel 5, which again is back across the street and just to the south of Hemingway, next to the Verizon building. It takes these 4 parcels and consolidates them. And this is one of those sites that is somewhat narrow, and I mean, for that reason, complex to park in an efficient way. Excuse me. So in some of these cases, we're thinking about some of these parcels as really fabric for the corridor, as opposed to necessarily a building that is a focal point, potentially, like you might have on parcel 3 to the north of that. So here we're showing blocks of townhouses with parking in the rear. We're achieving almost 20 dwelling units per acre, because the site's a little over an acre. And I think that this not only helps to make a nice street edge, and particularly against what might happen across the street, but it also serves, I think, as a nice transition and a liner to the residential neighborhoods to the west. In this case, we're showing parking access off of Hemingway, which I know is complex from a traffic circulation point of view, and this could easily be shifted to have an in and out, maybe an in off of North Main and a one-way loop or something like that. These are the kinds of things that are sort of endless possibilities, but we're just trying to give a sense of the site capacity. So that's a rather simple approach to a smaller site. I'm going to keep going here and shift up now to the north end, to parcel 1, just below Cross Street. And this is the medical office building, which you can see here, which is an interesting one because today it has a long 1-story facade right on the street. The siting of it is pretty good, but the 1-story aspect of it feels very sort of out of scale with the length of the facade, and the drop off and access points to the site are sort of suburban in style. And so, and Diep, I think you researched that this, it was about 27,000 square feet of use today in this site. So thought was that even though this is surrounded by residential buildings, by and large, single family, and some multifamily product here along Cross, which has a curious relationship to the site, sort of a shared drive, but that this would actually be a good location for a commercial use. And so we were sort of charged with how would you site a building on the corridor and still allow a little bit of buffer from the residential neighborhoods, but try to achieve some of the things and test whether or not the resulting building could be, sort of within the constraints of height, et cetera, could achieve enough of a new square footage to make it worthwhile. And I think this approach here adds about $20,000 square feet to the to beyond what is there today. So it's an intriguing concept. And this is essentially modeled after, some of you may be familiar, the 3-story office and retail building at Linden Square in Wellesley, actually a project that John worked on. So you can see here, this allows for a nice frontage build out of about 67%. We've brought the the building footprint right up to the street edge because there's a deep sidewalk here between the property line and the street edge. And so you can see it's an intriguing idea to think about. Maybe the positioning of buildings should be based more on the resulting depth of sidewalk relative to the type of use as opposed to the relationship to the property line. So those are something to think about further. There's another interesting challenge that is uncovered is that a 3-story commercial building, which has higher floor-to-floor heights than residential, could be challenging to do within the 45-foot height limit, because you're looking at perhaps a slightly taller ground floor, and then office floors may be typically at least 13 feet, and then you're dealing with a roof level here, and the way height is measured in Winchester is to the peak of the roof as opposed to the midpoint, which is in many communities. So particularly with commercial buildings wanting to screen mechanical equipment, et cetera, if you're doing a roof that's sort of integral to the facade, there's some things to be considered there. But you can see how a building of this scale actually can achieve quite a nice and active streetscape feel in some of these images on the left here. Okay, I'm just going to keep going. We've got a few more to get through here, and then we can open it up. Now down to the intersection of Swanton and Maine. This parcel 6 is actually a very intriguing parcel because it is tremendous sight lines from all directions. It's also, as I'm sure you all know, a unique site in that the parking area in the back here is a level below the street level. So there's a whole drop off of 10 to 12 feet from the intersection here down to this paved area in the back. The advantage of that is you can potentially take advantage of that and create a plinth so that the ground level is up at the street level, and you can park underneath that with sort of just accessing on grade at the back without going underground. So that's a strategy explored on this site. And so you can see the gray is kind of a parking plinth. You come in through the current entranceway and you can go into the garage. Here's a garage level plan over here in the lower left. And so you're able to achieve quite a comfortable amount of parking, which supports then another fairly good sized mixed use building here. And you can see the unit count and the parking space numbers here. This is right at the property line. So here's an example of the current bylaw says you need to have a 15-foot minimum setback in the GBD3, which this is the first building in the GBD3. And so if you had a 15-foot setback, this would really challenge the developability of this site. And the building today is right on the property line. And so this is a location where you have adequate sidewalk depth, and having a 0 lot line configuration here, particularly for retail uses on the ground floor, it feels like that would be something you'd want to try to accommodate. And again, one more comment about height. Here's an example of, again, where the definition of height can make it very challenging to do even a 3-story building, because the height is not only to the peak of the roof, but it's also based on the average grade around the base of the building. And so if the building is dropping off a full story in the rear, then you're sort of adding 5 or 6 feet to the height of your building before you even start at the ground floor. So there's things like that, which are things we encounter quite a bit on sites that have considerable topography. I'm sure I'm not touching on every issue here, but I'm trying to pick the highlights. So then that leaves these 3 narrow parcels at 7, 8, and 2. Each has sort of a different set of circumstances, which is kind of interesting. 7 is particularly interesting because it is also at that intersection of Swanton and Maine. And, you can imagine if these 2 buildings, 6 and 7, were developed with a certain quality, perhaps a minimum of 2 stories, and then you could do the same on the northwest corner here, where there's currently a parking lot at the corner, which is another thing that we would try to avoid in the future. I think you could really begin to get a sense of a node there that would be pretty attractive, even with Bellino Park taking up the other quadrant. So I've sort of combined these two in the interest of time, but so here are parcels 7 and 8, and we can just take a quick look at these together. Site 7, which is the one up at the intersection of Swanton Street, you know, it does call, in my mind, for commercial retail use at the corner here. And there are many different iterations of how that can be done. Here's an example of a building in the center at the top in Portsmouth. And I'm showing 2 stories of it, but it's an idea of maybe, commercial at the ground floor with office above or some nature, but it feels like a 2-story commercial building, as opposed to a building which has more of a residential feel, but it still has a commercial base. And so that's another very different feeling from that, but achieving the same thing of an active ground plane. And then when you get down to the parcel 8, again, we're looking at a similar situation we did earlier with parcel 5, a very narrow site here. It really is only conducive to, a smaller footprints if you're trying to make sure you can park the completely on site. And the Barmakian footprint takes up the whole, essentially the 3 property lines. It goes right essentially to the property lines. But in any case, this, even with the townhouse footprint and depth, it's challenging to get parking, sandwiched in here, and we can park partially underneath on the ground floor of the buildings from the rear. So you might have a different kind of feeling. This is a rather modern interpretation from the Denver area, but it just shows the idea of how interesting and close to the street residential can be if it has the appropriate kind of relationship to the street, maybe with a little landscape buffer and maybe even a slight change in elevation, that kind of thing. So all these are factors, but these are 3 very different ideas about residential and commercial mix, even on these small sites that could be accommodated. And then lastly, parcel 2 here, we're back up sort of diagonally across from the Winchester Medical Building and the Verizon buildings off to the left here. This is the Meineke, I believe. And in any case, this site, we've shown with a different prototype. It's another small residential prototype. So as opposed to townhouses, we're looking at these 4-unit buildings that you find around Newton and other locations like that. It allows you to get a decent density on a small and narrow site of about 14 dwelling units per acre. You get a reasonable frontage build out, closer to 50%, and setbacks need to be adjusted. This is a case where you have a narrow sidewalk, so the siting of the buildings again is important relative to that. In any case, and the parking ratios can adjust depending on how many units you have, but it's comfortable in this particular iteration. So anyway, this kind of endless information here. I just want to have like 2 more slides just in summary. So this is the original parcel. As you can see now, all of the test fits fit together. So this is a much longer. It's about a 3,000 lineal foot stretch of the roadway, and we're not by any means doing test fits on all of the sites, but I think it's a good representation, and you can see some nodes that are important focal points. This slide is the last one, and I think this is interesting because this is what I was saying, that I've collaged the study from the fall is in that small box, yellow box on the bottom there. It's actually collaged into an aerial, and then the study that we just completed is almost 3 times the length of what we're doing here. But But this idea of unit count and density is important to just put into context. And so the Clark to Skillings thing, and this is what you were asking for, Sally, the Clark to Skillings section down at the bottom here, we did a number of different varieties of approaches to some of those sites. And in the minimum unit count we got was 154 total dwelling units along this stretch. And when we used 4-story buildings and all multifamily, we got the total unit count for these studies at the southern end here, got up to about 255 dwelling units. So it's about a difference of, a little over 100 just in that stretch. And the density range is interesting that it tended to be smaller on the small parcels, and it sort of makes sense in terms of the logistics of developing on those parcels. And the large parcels got up, up to as high as 57 dwelling units per acre. And again, that was when we were using the 4-story multifamily approach, as opposed to the studies to the north that we just were looking at, where we're essentially making the assumption that we're dealing with a 3-story and a mixed use equation. So interestingly enough, the unit count in these studies combined, the minimum was 153, and the maximum unit count got up to 286 dwelling units if you chose every concept that was the most intense. So you can see the resulting ranges here, and it makes sense that the density ranges would be less than the southern end, again, because of the height and the mix of use equation. So I think I'm going to catch my breath and let others.
Hey, Michael, could I just make 2 quick points? If you can go back to the slide that shows the parcel number 8 and/or parcel number 2.
Okay.
Let's see. Parcel number 8 was toward the end.
Okay. There we go.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things about this, which is helpful, is that one of the decisions is understanding the scale of new buildings compared to the graining of the existing neighborhoods around it. And I think there's, one of the facts of today's life is that we live in bigger units of housing than we used to. There are certain reasons for that, some of them good, some of them bad, but it's kind of a fact of life. And so the building footprints have a natural tendency to be a little bit bigger, but you can really pay attention, I think, as a town and as a place, to the size buildings you want and where they are on the site, so that how they impact the immediate buildings and yards behind them, which in these 2 instances, I think fall into one single family and maybe 2 family units pretty quickly. So in this image, for example, biasing the building toward the street rather than having parking in front and biasing them toward the neighboring houses, which chances are a little bit smaller. This is another grain of decision that I think is critical into what people need to be thinking of as another kind of lever to pull on to get development here to be shaped the way you want it to be shaped when the opportunity comes up. So that was just another point I just wanted to add to the mix.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was
Thank you.
very thought-provoking. So why don't we? I'll just open it up to the board and go fly with your questions.
So I want to just open with this continuing question in my mind about how does a town translate test fits like this? How do they what information do you extract from these kinds of exercises that guide your zoning? So, that's a huge question, but that's what I'm trying to understand. Yeah. I know, I'm sorry. So like
No, go ahead.
No, I'm just thinking, okay, look at, you talk about what would be the preferred build out of this site. Does zoning then come up with language that instructs developers who want to do something as of right, so it's highly predictable, and exactly what our preferred build out would be? Is that the extreme example of that?
Well, if I'm answering this correctly, Sally, I don't think, I mean, zoning bylaws and design guidelines can be different degrees of prescriptive. And form-based codes tend to be particularly prescriptive. And they, by establishing very specific parameters, they then sort of allow for more as of right development. I don't think that you necessarily need to go to that degree. And I feel like it's more the sort of high level goals that you're trying to achieve, like, you know, vibrancy on the corridor, what diversity of uses, scale, ideas about architecture. We haven't even talked about sort of architectural character, but except for to the degree of roof forms and how buildings are sited on, you know. So again, you know, we're dealing with all these issues of site relationships and of building details. And it's just a question of, you don't want to be so prescriptive, and you certainly don't want to prescribe style, but to the point where you're creating a deterrent for redevelopment. It wants to enhance, because it's promoting a larger vision that includes an improved public realm, which I know is something that you've been very interested in all along. So not losing sight of.
No, I understand that. So a well-crafted zoning code for North Main Street would communicate our objectives, not be overly prescriptive about form, but definitely provide some standards that should be adhered to. Like, please put the parking in the back, or please don't have exits from buildings, you know, on this middle of the site, wherever you say not to put them. So that's the sort of the balanced code that we're going for.
Yeah, and if for example, to ensure that scale is achieved, there's lots of, you know, I mean, I could actually, I could pull up, I'm not going to right now, but you know, the criteria, and these can be illustrated by including precedent images in design guidelines, or by actually doing graphics. But for example, if you don't want to have a facade that's over 80 feet in length or 100 feet in length without having certain things happening to it, like step backs or a break in the facade, or, you know, and so you're in each case, you're requiring or asking for major and minor volumes and certain aspects of rhythm and dynamics, et cetera. And so you basically have a kit of parts here that you can, you know, evaluate a proposal against and say, oh, that doesn't quite check enough boxes, et cetera.
So the standards that we would come up with would apply to each section of the corridor that we decided applies to. We could say GBD2 and GBD3, for example, right? That they would have perhaps their own standards for each area. And would the code also, well, the plan calls for desirable densities, but the code permits maximum densities, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think another interesting way to think about it, which may dovetail with the MBTA aspect, is creating sub-districts. And we did this again in Meriden. We created about 6 different sub-districts in the downtown, and each one had a different quality to them. One was a historic corridor, and the other was one that are a neighborhood that's built around a central park. And the other was an area that had a lot of civic buildings. And each one of those sections of the downtown, or in this case, the corridor, has a certain quality to them that is not just what is there today, but and what it wants to feel like. But, you know, it's okay to have a civic building sitting back from the street to a degree with a, you know.
What was the geography of those 6 different, 7 different?
If I could we're getting really close to our.
Oh, sorry.
endpoint.
Okay, I'm sorry, we're getting in too deep.
Yeah, we're
I
pretty
should
deep,
just
but-
let others ask.
Yeah, so I Ching, Kurt, I heard from Nick. Nick is unfortunately feeling ill this evening, so he won't be able to join us, but Kurt and I Ching.
That was so interesting and so much to think about, Michael. Thank you, and John. I wonder to get going on this. What I'm thinking is that we need to sort of identify some of the values maybe that we want from this, right? So say we want to increase walkability and maybe get specific and say we want to have some sort of like center of services for residents at Swanton and Maine, say, right? So when we identify those values and maybe perhaps goals, then we use this kit of parts to sort of incentivize that and get it to that granular level, get it to that district level, and form that, make that, create that code to sort of promote that. Is that sort of how you would say we should approach it from a value space to like, then how do you code this?
I think that's great. I really like that way of putting it. And I think, after you've established the values that you feel are appropriate and maybe you begin to identify where, what's the differences between certain sections of the corridor, then you're looking at the existing code and what is not allowed and what needs to be adjusted, such as it's okay to do retail north of Swanton Street kind of thing. And then there's other layers, like in the southern section, you can try to incentivize mixed use because you want an active corridor. But if that is being folded into a district for the MBTA Communities Initiative, then you have to allow development there just purely multifamily as of right. So then you have to take into consideration, how that impacts the quality of the streetscape.
So looking at the time, what are our next steps?
Well,
if the goal is to come up with code by a certain date, how do we go from here to there?
Well, we have the upcoming MBTA Communities Working Group meetings, and it's hard to digest in 35 minutes, these weeks of work here. So I guess I would certainly welcome an open dialogue, and we can circle back and, following the MBTA Communities thing, which might give us a little more of a lens, and put forward some ideas about next steps. And I know we're thinking that this is continuing on, and we're working towards, ultimately some design guidelines and zoning equation. So,
right.
Yeah, I think that I think maybe it's something where the board should meet maybe on its own and set aside 45 minutes to an hour to really discuss what we've seen here, so that we can hammer out what I Ching put well in terms of. I'm not going to rephrase what you said, I Ching. I will not do a good job, but to follow that sort of path for analysis, so that when next we meet with you folks, we'll have a much better sense of where we might want to go.
So I'm almost imagining just to incorporate what you're both saying, that there's almost like an opportunity for each of us to think about what would we value most, and take either each of the test sites, or take clusters of the test sites, or take our own analysis of different sections of each side of North Main Street and identify what we value most about that section and what we think we could bring forward more, or try to overcome more, if that's how we feel about that section. Is that a process that the planning board could engage in?
Yes, most definitely.
Michael, do you think that it is something that planning boards do at this juncture?
Sure. And I think it'd be great if you guys had your own discussion, and then we could have a facilitated or a discussion with
Right.
with us as well, kind of just to get feedback and kind of try to hone in on something. I will definitely forward a PDF of this presentation, and I'll resend the presentation from the fall from the Clark to Skilling section, so you can have the two together, and because it's all part of the equation.
And we will put that up on the planning board's website as well, so everyone else can see it. I mean,
There's
what
a
I
huge amount of expertise that went into these analyses, and we need to catch up.
Yeah, I mean, some of the tools that you've used in terms of, protecting the neighborhoods by moving buildings to the front, things about, being careful about how it's positioned relative to the sidewalk and how these are really fascinating to me, because they're just, we can look at a section and say, we have these tools we can use to protect certain things or to develop certain things. And I really love this idea of this toolkit. So I don't know why it struck me so vigorously this evening, but yeah,
Good. That's great.
Yeah. So
I think it would be great in another meeting, Diab, if we could walk through these and each of us could talk about what we thought about the whole thing as we go through it.
Yeah, I would suggest that we start with a discussion of the test pits below Clark Street, because I think that would work well in terms of what the MBTA 3A stuff is doing.
Yep.
I think we're going to have a meeting for each of these at the least, and we can schedule those. I think we're going to have to schedule those into April at this point, but I would love it if we sat down for 45 minutes to an hour plus and just devoted time just to this. And maybe we need to schedule some extra meetings to accommodate that, depending upon what our workload's like. So,
well, let us know how we can plug in and answer questions and whatever. And there's 4 months left in the fiscal year, so we're in good shape, I think. So
yeah, I think we're good for that. Yeah. So any last comments or questions from the board? I think, as usual, incredibly thought-provoking.
Yes.
And so that's
Thank you.
the best thing that I think can come out of this is to force us to think. So really appreciate that. Some of us need to be forced to think.
Thank you, Sean, and thank you, Michael.
folks.
Thank you.
Yes,
You're welcome.
and we will definitely be in touch with you folks.
all right.
Okay.
Sounds
Thanks,
great.
guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Good to see you guys.
So at this point, we're actually amazingly still on time. Thank you for, we managed to get an extra 15 minutes on that, which I think is great. So our next part of our agenda is to talk in particular about the Springtown meeting article, the revision of section 355. And we have with us Jay Tellerman, town council, and also David Feichenbaum from the ZBA has joined us. So one of the, do you happen to have the language up, Yicheng, from last? Sorry, I just realized that it's not part of this. It was in last week's packet.
It's in the last packet.
Yeah.
What was last packet? 228, perhaps?
No, wasn't it? Was it last week only? It was 228. Was it? Oh, that's right. February only had 28 days. Yes, 228.
So, sorry. You can start while I look for it.
So to set the stage for this, so to refresh everyone's memory, section 355 has to do with allowing certain renovations or construction updates to properties on single and duplex lots. They're sort of to allow them to go forward via special permits rather than through a variance. And I can pop it up if you can't find it right away.
Yeah, I can't find it.
Okay, let me grab that. Okay. That's interesting. Why can't I find it? It was last Tuesday.
Are you just looking for the new 355?
Yes, that's exactly it. That's all we're looking for.
Do you want to let me share and I could maybe
Yes.
find it in my stuff? Hold on, let me,
Yeah.
okay.
No, I don't want to share. I want to let you share.
I'm not finding it in the February 28th packet. I'm sorry, Deb.
Well, then I don't know which, I'm pretty sure we discussed it last week. Oh, no, it was 2 weeks ago. Was it 2 weeks
Let
ago?
me see.
Darn it, I don't recall anymore. Okay. Jay, it's all you if you've got it handy.
Okay. Let's see. People see that?
Yes, that's it. Thank you. So one of the confusing things, what I think this board is having difficulty understanding is the phrase that's actually in front of the red edit, which is increasing the non-conforming nature of a structure. And we actually had a test case, as it were, last time we met, where there was a project which essentially was, it moved 1 inch closer to the side setback, it was within the side setback already, so it was non-conforming because of that. But the new addition moved 1 inch further into that setback. And so the question that we have is, what does it mean? Would that increase the non-conforming nature? What does it mean to increase a non-conforming nature?
And the question was whether it's an absolute or is it a quantitative or a qualitative question also? Right, because we said that 1 inch seemed not.
Yeah, so if, for
significant.
instance, yeah, if you moved an inch, that was pretty minor. But if it was already non-conforming and they moved an extra 5 feet, that seemed like it would be.
Or even 1 foot.
Yeah, depending. So we're kind of trying to figure out what is how do you measure the non-conformity of something like that?
Are you asking me?
Yes. I'm asking you.
Okay, all right. So when it comes to single or two family structures, I think the answer to that question would be a little bit different than, or nuanced different than non-singular two family. But to Sally's question, I think it's more qualitative than quantitative. If something is conforming, taking aside 355, and let's just say you didn't have really a 355 and you kind of reverted to the case law and the statute, and someone wanted to expand a pre-existing non-conforming structure that was non-conforming with respect to, say, the left side setback by pushing further into that left side setback. That's 100% qualitative review when you're determining whether or not to grant it a special permit. So if someone in the normal scenario, that's what it would be. A qualitative review as to whether or not the increase in nonconformity would be detrimental to the neighborhood.
Right.
So your bylaw obviously liberalizes in several significant ways that the practice for single and two families. It provides a few examples of things that would be allowed as a matter of right. And then it also discusses arguably new nonconformities as well in the final paragraph. So numbers 1, 2, and 3 are the by right elements that don't require any review.
And however, I'm trying to really understand the impact of the additional statements, language in red in each of the top and bottom
Okay.
here.
So what was left? So again, as we discussed previously, when we were talking about this particular bylaw, and as we've discussed a little bit in some of my office hours, where some of you have darkened my door, the bylaw was adopted between some of the recent, between kind of the last two of the most significant recent cases. So it was between the Gale versus Gloucester case and the Deirdre case. The Gale versus Gloucester case provided some further insight in this, and then the Deirdre case spoke to new nonconformities. So what the Deirdre case said was that, yes, you can never, per Gale versus Gloucester and the Norwell case before that and the Edgartown case before that, you never have to get more than a special permit for an increase in a nonconformity of a pre-existing non-conforming single or two-family structure. The Deirdre case added a wrinkle and said, except when it's a brand new nonconformity. So again, taking the example that we just gave, where something, the sole nonconformity was a left side setback nonconformity. If you were going further into that left side setback, it's still just a special permit. But if you now wanted to expand into the right side setback, that's a new nonconformity, and that would require a variance. So in the normal course, that was the case. Now, nothing in this bylaw talked about adding new nonconformities. The concept of adding new nonconformities is discussed above, I think in 354, but it is not discussed in this provision 355, which speaks only to single and two-family structures. So the term wasn't used. It was before the Deirdre case. So there was reason to believe or reason to be concerned that an ambiguity had been kind of hatched by the imposition of the court's decision in Deirdre, such that it should follow the reasoning in that case that variances would be required for new nonconformities. The tension, however, was with the first 4 words in the last paragraph where it said in any other case. So it doesn't say anything about new nonconformities, but it says in any other case, then you got to get a special permit if you're going to change a pre-existing nonconforming structure. So the question is in any other case, was that intended to encompass even new nonconformities to single and two-family structures? Or was it, just talking about single and two-family structures in general, and the case law should be interpreted, the more specific provisions of the case law should prevail and state that, or stand for the proposition that a variance would be required. When I was confronted with this, I said there was gray area, and I could see both arguments applying. That said, I've been clear that I wouldn't want to go into court. Let's say the zoning board decided that, and I'm certainly not saying anything about the zoning board's practice. I think they've been trying to be honest arbiters of this as well. Let's say the zoning board said new nonconformity, go get a variance. And someone appealed that decision, denial of the special permit or whatever, appealed that and said, wait a second, Your Honor. It says in any other case. That's pretty sweeping language, Your Honor, in any other case. And I've said, frankly, that I really wouldn't want to be in the position of explaining to the judge why in any other case doesn't mean in any other case. Even though I might have an argument that, well, Your Honor, there's a new case that happened in the courts. But my concern there would be that the judge would say, well, then you could change your bylaw. And it's not for me to, there's new cases all the time, but I have to interpret the language of your bylaw in accordance with the common and accepted usage of the words therein. And the words therein say in any other case.
And when you say other, it's referring to the differentiating statements of the 3 paragraphs. One is with insufficient area, one is with insufficient frontage, and one is it encroaches upon one or more yard setbacks, right? And so those are not deemed
those are all by right. Those are all building permit only.
Right.
So
okay.
That's an extreme gift to property owners. I'm not saying it's a bad gift, but that's a benefit that the town meeting decided, given the huge number of non-conforming single and 2-family structures in Winchester, that this was going to happen. Now, there's other counterbalances to that, including site plan review, but it's that's a different animal. But so what it says,
in any other case is drawing from. So in any situation where
anything else that you're going to do to a pre-existing non-conforming 2 or single or 2-family structure, just come in and get a special permit. So you get these few by right things, which are pretty nice, and if it's something else, then you got to come and get a special permit.
Right.
And it says any other case. So my concern, in fairness to the 2 competing definitions, is let's avoid any ambiguity. It's always our goal when we're drafting bylaws to make them conform to the case laws that exist at the time. And let's avoid ambiguities, and let's figure out what we want to do. And the question that I posed when we were doing this, and the question I think you all posed to yourself, is, well, which direction do we want to go? Do we want to go in the direction of the way we've kind of interpreted this for a while, which is to say you're never going to need more than a special permit for an expansion of a pre-existing non-conforming single or 2-family, taking site plan approval aside for a second? Or do we want to go the other way and take heed of the decision in Deirdrick and say, you know what, if someone's doing a new nonconformity, we do want to make them go through the variance process. And either would have been fine. I think if we were going to do the latter, we would have changed this bylaw as well. And we would have said, not said in any other case, we would say in any other case, except for the addition of a new nonconformity. And then we would have said new nonconformities need a variance. Here, the purpose of this language was intended to adhere to the prior practice that I understood, and I think that we all understood to be the case, that we're going to keep it at special permit max for this. And the challenge I gave myself and to Brian at the time was, I'm going to see if I can, because I didn't think it needed much. I'm going to see if I can do it in 10 words or less. And I think I got it in 10 words. however many words it took, it would have been fine, but I didn't want to burden town meeting and the planning board and all the stakeholders in this with any more language than we needed to just essentially kind of restate and clarify what has been the prior practice in recent years.
I'm trying to work through this. I'm trying to understand what the decision tree is previously and currently, just to try to understand the nuances here. So let's say a project comes before the building commissioner. So the building commissioner can make two decisions. Building commissioner can look at 1, 2, and 3 and decide this is by right. Or the building, and if that's fine, then that decision's made. Then the building commissioner can look at it and say, this change does not increase the non-conforming nature of said structure for some other reason, and say, okay, then it can go by right. Because the sentence does not increase the non-conforming nature of said structure encompasses more than just those 1, 2, and 3. Because that's a qualitative decision, but 1, 2, and 3 say, in these situations, it's immediately by right, so there's no qualitative decision involved there. So there's still a qualitative decision that the building commissioner makes. And the building commissioner can say, okay, this is a minor increase of the non-conforming.
Well, I don't think, can I just stop you there? I really don't think that in this instance that the building commissioner is making a qualitative decision. I think the decision by the building commissioner under 1, 2, and 3 is quantitative.
Oh, I agree. I agree. To me, it seems though that 1, 2, and 3 are they immediately remove it from consideration in terms, they're immediately by right, but
Correct.
There may be other aspects which allow a qualitative deliberation under that sentence where it says does not increase non-conforming nature. Because if it doesn't meet 1, 2, and 3, then it could be, it still has to be determined whether it is a detrimental or increases it to an extent, right?
Under 1, 2, or 3, or under the last paragraph?
No, under the first paragraph. So it says the building commissioner has to make a determination.
So what that language means though is, especially the last sentence, the following circumstances shall not be deemed to increase the non-conforming nature of said structure.
Mm-hmm.
So for it to tip normally in the normal case under the cases, it's pretty much any substantive change would tip it into the special permit criteria to make a determination as to whether or not it's pre-existing non-conforming. So let's say in the normal case, if the building commissioner is confronted with a pre-existing non-conforming structure, let's say it's a lot area question, it's on insufficient lot area.
Mm-hmm.
And someone is going to, and this is what the cases say, and someone is going to add just 2 small gabled dormers on the second floor, not changing the lot area thing, not increasing the footprint. They're just 2 small single pane window dormers on the second floor. The building commissioner has the authority under the cases to say, no one could ever say that that increases the non-conforming. I'm going to let it go. What I counsel building commissioners on, however, is that if you think that a change that might be, and I wouldn't fault the building commissioner for saying that. That doesn't mean I always would agree with it either, but they have a certain amount of discretion. What I always advise building commissioners, however, is that if they think that someone who lives next door or across the street would at least want to be heard on that and comment on it in the context of a public hearing, I would always, if I was the building commissioner, deny that building permit and say, no, you gotta go get a special permit. So that's about as close to qualitative as I think the building commissioner is going to get under the case law. Here, what this language means is that under no circumstance could the occurrence of 1, 2, or 3 be grounds to send it to the zoning board for a special permit.
Right.
Those are giving him the right to avoid making that referral for that process, because those are lumped in automatically in his discretion to just say yes.
So let me take one of the examples we saw the other week, where the building encroaches on the side setback, and the alteration increases that encroachment by 1 inch. Now, if I look at 1, 2, or 3, it doesn't fall underneath any of those.
Well, it's number 3. It's
Nope.
It's a side setback.
Nope. It says the reconstruction extension will comply. So this is one where the reconstruction will not comply.
Oh, will right, yes.
So this is one where you've moved the wall, or you moved something 1 inch further into an already encroached upon setback. So 1, 2, and 3 don't apply. But I think the building commissioner could say that it does not increase the non-conforming nature because it is such a small change.
He still retains that authority as well under the cases, correct? That's in particular the Norwell case. But
Right.
yes, he still does for, and we give little examples of, a little covered roof over front steps. I try and give examples when I give seminars to building commissioners, which I do a few times a year. Maybe a little bit of work on a deck, these little ornamental details that really that no one could have a reasonable objection to. That, so he still retains that qualitative authority, Diab. So for sure he does that, but 1, 2, and 3 are definitely those are more mechanical.
Those are mechanical. So the building commissioner he gets this first decision, 1, 2, and 3 immediately by right. Then if it doesn't follow the 1, 2, and 3, there's this region where he could say that qualitatively this does not increase the non-conforming nature. Let's take our 1 inch increase in the encroachment. But then he says, okay, now I've determined that there is a significant encroachment. So it then goes to the Board of Appeals, and the Board of Appeals says, okay, so you could do this by a special permit, but only if it's not substantially more detrimental than whatever is the sentence right off the bottom of the screen.
Then the existing non-conforming structure.
Existing non-conformity. So at that point,
the neighborhood,
the Board of Appeals could deny it, and then it would have to go back to being a variance if they wanted to move forward.
If it was a new non-conformity.
Or if it was, yeah, so in the past, the language didn't distinguish between new nonconformities and existing nonconformities because the case law didn't at the time this was written. So the practice, as far as I can determine from speaking with the building commissioner, et cetera, was that in the past, there was no distinction made between new or existing nonconformities. So if we want to, one of the concerns I think that I heard at the ZBA when they discussed this was that this would actually increase the ability to, I think they were worried that this opened up the doors wider than it had been before. But what I'm seeing in this last paragraph is that it has always been, the Board of Appeals has always had the power to say that this is more detrimental. And so even if it is a new nonconformity or it's an existing nonconformity, they can always shut it down and say, you have to go through a variance. Is that a reasonable interpretation of that last paragraph?
Without, you mean without the language? Without the
With
new
or
language?
without, the ZBA has always had the power and would
No.
continue to have the
I would
power
say
to say,
no.
Says they
No.
may by special permit allow.
No. No, well, so,
Can you elaborate?
yeah, so wait, just 1 second, David. They could deny the special permit.
Mhm.
If they want, but if they're gonna deny a special permit, they're not gonna grant a variance.
Well, maybe they
Um,
would say then that they would say this is inappropriate for a special permit, and you'd say that, but
No, but you can't make someone apply for a variance when there's no requirement to apply for a variance.
okay,
The only relief required would be a special permit. Now, it's different for non-singular two-family structures under the cases and under your bylaw. But here, the best interpretation, in my opinion, of the prior language, and the only interpretation of this potentially amended language, would be that the special permit is the most you would ever have to apply for.
but there's, okay. So you
There's a
could not-
countervailing opinion on the existing language. I don't think it's the best opinion on it. I think that you can make a defensible argument on it, but I don't think it'd be the prevailing argument. In most courts, I mean, judges differ, you never know, but I'd feel more comfortable with the interpretation that no variance is ever required. So the effort here has been to either clarify that or reverse course and make it harder than adding a variance requirement.
But this doesn't, the new language doesn't diminish the ZBA's ability to deny.
Oh, not at all.
Okay,
Special permits can be denied with very little rationale or reason. That's very clear. The case law says no one is entitled to a special permit, and the board need not make voluminous findings in support of that denial. And they're going to be entitled to deference 100% of the time. So even though the standard is a little easier for applicants to work under than a variance, which is impossible, then it still leaves the Board of Appeals with extremely wide discretion to say no.
okay, thank you. That's kind of what I was trying to get at is I want to make sure the ZBA still has the power that they think they need in order to do their job. So I've kind of taken over most of the time so far, and I apologize. The rest of the board, please go ahead.
Kurt,
I don't have a whole lot to add. This is, I'm listening and learning, so.
I think the decision that we need to make is whether I think we made a policy decision last year that we wanted to retain the flexibility that the town had been that applicants had to go for a special permit, and that this language, as you explained to us last fall, Jay, retained that flexibility. I know that the ZBA has some significant issues with this, and I think David, if you wanted to give us a short discussion of what your significant issues were with this, from a, I think what would be really useful is to understand where you feel like it would be difficult for you to apply the new language. Because I think that's really the question we have is this language gives sufficient clarity that the policy that the planning board wishes to continue, does that give you the clarity you need to proceed with your decisions?
I'm not sure where to begin. Jay is an expert on the law here, and I'm not. I assume Jay's read what I wrote and what the Board of Appeals together agreed was his position. Did you, Jay?
And I don't think I've seen it, David.
Oh.
I mean, I got a
well.
report from Adam regarding the board's discussion on it, but I don't think I've
Well,
seen.
well, my view, and I'm not the expert at all, so I don't know where that's in. But my view is that it's pretty clear that when you look at the Dudrick decision, that you need a variance if you want to have a new nonconformity, and that's not inconsistent with our bylaw in Winchester. And anyway, I don't want to get into the detail. That's our position, that you need a variance to have a new nonconformity. The difficulty, Diab, is that, and I don't think this has been given enough credence here. It's very significant in terms of what you've been saying, Diab. The Board of Appeals regularly waves these things through under special permits. Special permits almost always get granted. Does the Board of Appeals have the power to deny them? Of course it does. Does it actually happen? Rarely. And so you need to, it's not enough to look at the language and say, well, the Board of Appeals has the power to deny these. The question from a practical point of view and from the point of view of what's right for the town of Winchester is a little different. And I'll try to be brief. There's so many things to say. One thing is, there's been a lot of anecdotal commentary about what the Board of Appeals has done, what its practice is. And I think we need to get the opinions in front of us. Let's get a pile of the 20 or 30 decisions that relate to this and see whether it really is the way everybody anecdotally has been saying it is. Dorothy Simboli, who's been on the Board of Appeals for way longer than anybody else, for about 6 years, says, well, it is true that the board has sometimes granted special permits in cases where it looks like it should have been a variance, but it has done that in what she describes as de minimis cases. And so that's one thing to consider. The second thing to consider is the board almost always waves these through. It's a very sharp difference in the standard. And so why does that matter? It matters because and I'll just say it directly, in the northern end of town, which is where most of the nonconformities exist, if you set up a standard that basically says you don't need a variance, every case you can have a special permit, you're going to get a lot of a very aggressive development in properties in the north end of town. People are going to, you gave the example of encroaching on the left side yard. So imagine a house that's on half of the lot. It's the left half of the lot. You're going to get people now who are going to come in and they're going to want to build all the way over to and encroach on the right side and build into the back and encroach on the back end. And in the current situation, as I understand it from Dorothy and our interpretation of the law, it'd be hard to do that. In this new approach, it'll be easy because these things get waved through all the time. So why does that? So you might say to me, well, that's good. Why does that matter? And the simple answer is it's going to make a big mess out of the neighborhoods in the North End, number one. And number two, it's going to get, there's three things actually. Number two, it's going to get rid of a lot of affordable housing that you and I Ching have always expressed concern about. You're basically going to get much bigger properties, much bigger structures that are going to be more valuable, and they're going to be less accessible to people who want to look for an affordable unit. It's just, it's the nature of the kind of development that you're going to see. The third thing is, this is, and I've made this point in this memo, this is unfair because there are going to be properties side by side where one that have essentially similar houses on them, and one of the houses is going to be non-conforming because the lot, to take an example, the lot size may be slightly too small. And the next door lot, which if you looked at the two of them, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference, the structure is conforming. So now you're going to set up a situation where the person on the left house can get waved through on a special permit, and the person on the right house has to get a variance. That's not fair. It's inappropriate. And it, I mean, we could go around and look at all the lots in town, but I bet there are quite a few where people are going to be essentially treated unfairly. I don't think you should set that up.
Why would it be unfair if they're two different? Why was it unfair if they're two different size lots?
Because one of them could be 5 square feet larger than the other one. They're essentially the same.
Well, but that exists now already. One of the critiques of the case law as we know it is that it treats conforming properties differently than non-conforming properties, where non-conforming property could get away with a special permit for expansions of their pre-existing non-conformity, and a conforming property is always going to have to get a variance if they're introducing a new non-conformity. So the disparities always exist. Now, I want to be clear on this. You know, David raises some good points, which is kind of why we're having this conversation. That is, you all are the policymakers along with the legislative assembly, that's town meeting, and you have to decide. Do you want to provide a benefit or not provide the benefit?
Let me interrupt you now.
I need to.
I'll just give one more sentence here.
Okay.
The Board of Appeals is likely to oppose this at town meeting. That's going to be hard for you. I suggest that if it's desirable from a policy point of view to do something like this, it would be very desirable to do it in a much more thoughtful way that makes some distinctions between gross and grotesque structures that might be waved through, and situations where I think we all could agree, well, yeah, that looks okay. And I suggest that you don't present this to town meeting and that we spend some time hammering out a more sensible policy for the town. And I think that would work well. I urge you to do that. And I'm
David, are you proposing to really expand on what the terminology substantially more detrimental actually means, like putting a finer point on that?
No, I'm suggesting putting a finer point on Jay's 10 words so that instead of just flatly saying any new nonconformity, that there would be some nuance to that. And
what would that nuance look like?
Well, I'm not in a position right now to say because it's a policy issue.
Is it the
needs to be
qualitative
hashed out as a
nature?
policy matter, but among all the parties who care.
I'd like to respond a little to what you said, David. So the first thing you said is that if this went forward, you would have a lot more development where people would encroach further into the lot and you would have massive redevelopment. So since the existing policy is to allow new nonconformities, we haven't seen this. We haven't seen a massive rebuilding in the North End where the ability to go for a special permit and not a variance has resulted in these massive encroachments. So I mean, this is a straw man in my opinion, because if that had, we would have seen that. And as you yourself put it, Dorothea Stromboli said that you haven't had to make a decision. There haven't been that many decisions where you felt like, yeah, this could have been a variance, but we're going to let it go. So I don't know that that first point actually, I don't think that it really works in this situation. The second point of saying that if we don't have a variance, this is all going to go through because the ZBA just lets all special permits go through, it kind of implies what you're saying is that the ZBA can't be trusted to essentially do their job, and that you have to force a variance on the ZBA because they will not, you know, follow the instruction where it says they have to be able to determine that it will not be substantially more detrimental. So you're saying that in order for the ZBA to do its job, you have to force it into a corner and you can't give it any sort of leeway, which seems unreasonable. I'm sorry. I mean, there's got to be some sort of ability for a board to come to a reasoned determination without saying, if we don't force it into a corner, it won't do its job. I mean, every board has to have has to be able to make a qualitative judgment, but you're saying you can't even trust yourselves.
I'm saying that if you go back and look at the statistics, you'll find that you're right. What you said is correct.
But but I mean, you can't force a board to do something if it doesn't want to.
No, but you can create a bylaw that establishes a policy for the town that is going to work given the realities of human nature.
I mean, I don't know that I would use, I mean, if that's an issue with the way the ZBA is applying itself, then you'd have to look at more than just this, and you have to say, where else in the zoning bylaw do we have to really, you know, encircle the ZBA so that it has no opportunity to make a qualitative decision?
That'll be for, well, let's do that on another day. We're talking about this particular bylaw right now.
Right, but we're also talking about a policy that this town has followed for however many decades. And
have you reviewed the decision?
Have I reviewed the decision?
You made a statement that's based on decisions of the Board of Appeals.
No,
I haven't seen those. I
upon...
asked for them, but there's no way to find them. You can't even get them. Have you read those decisions?
I have based my statement on my discussions with the building commissioner, who's been around a lot longer than anyone on the Board of Appeals. So, I mean, that has to count for something.
We just are in a disagreement here. There's no, I
Yes,
think
we
you
are.
should press.
We
You should press on.
Agree to disagree.
We
David,
disagree about how this works.
If your board wrote a decision that the planning board hasn't read, then we're not working with that level of additional perspective. Is that right?
There's a question that is about the policy. And one of the arguments that's made is the plan, and it's been said this way, the Board of Appeals always, or it has a practice, and it essentially always treats these situations as special permit situations and not variance situations.
And these situations,
in order to understand whether that's accurate, you have to go back several years at least back to the Diedrich decision and look at the decisions. And because my impression, at least from Dorothy, is that that's not an accurate characterization. And so, you know, it's like don't you want the evidence, or do you, or do you? You see what I mean?
I have to confess that I am really not clear about this conversation and about the impact of the insertion of those words, and it makes me sound dumb. So I'm sorry.
No, this is complicated. And
Yes.
it's subtle
Ethan, could
and
you
it's
scroll a
nuanced.
tiny bit down so I can see the top of that paragraph?
Oh, this is Jay, actually.
Oh, sorry. No, see, now it's too far. I don't know, maybe it's different than the way you see it.
Hey, I'm just the lawyer, Sally.
good.
Come on. So we don't have to change anything. If anyone asks me my opinion on if someone is required to go for a variance for something, then my opinion is going to be that no, they don't. So if this doesn't go to town meeting, or if town meeting doesn't change it, I don't think it's going to change that practice necessarily. I think it is going to result in litigation, perhaps, if the zoning board takes a different view on that. And again, I'm not faulting the zoning board for taking that view. I just don't think it's the correct view. So we either clear up an ambiguity, or we change course and do something different than what I'm told by the building commissioner as well. That has been past practice. So again, and talking about policies, getting into nuance here, it's to me not a great idea, because I've been involved in situations where people try and say, well, if it's over so many square feet, then it's always going to be a special permit. And if it goes over that, it's going to be a variance. In every situation where I've seen a community do that and try and get creative, it's been a disaster. And that's because numerical criteria can't be applied because every house is situated on a property differently. That's why I think it's good to give the zoning board a wide amount of discretion to either grant or deny special permits on this based upon qualitative criteria as to whether or not there's detriment to the neighborhood.
Well, I appreciate that. I am very concerned that the zoning board would apply a different interpretation to this than would town council, or a different interpretation from a policy. And so I think it has to be, I mean, I don't know, personally, I think we have to change the language so that there is a single interpretation and there's a single understanding of what the policy is. Right now, I think there are multiple, and that is not good. So that's, I think we need to change the language. And but I think I've been really clear on where I stand, and it's real, I should shut up and let the rest of the board.
Well, I mean, and I should probably shut up too, Diab, especially because I'm not on either board, but to the extent that there's disagreement on the interpretation of any bylaw, then there's a good reason to change it. There are two reasonable interpretations to me, one more reasonable than the other. And to the extent that could exist, and the public, the stakeholders, the neighbors, the applicants, everyone, to the extent that we're confused, they're even more confused.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's always a good reason to fix a bylaw. What you want to fix it to is up to you. I'm happy to speak to the merits of this fix in terms of clearing up the language at town meeting. The policy question I leave to others, but I'm happy to explain to town meeting the rationale for this change, or the converse, the making everything a variance that's a new nonconformity.
And I just want to restate some of what you said, so I really got it clearly. So you have an opinion about the meaning of the law, and that your opinion is right now, in Winchester, new nonconformities can pass through by a special permit. They don't require a variance. And you acknowledge that there's another point of view which you, and you are an expert, say is credible, but not the right, it's not as sound, and it isn't in the end the right opinion. And
Oh, right or wrong, I wouldn't call it that. I would say that look, if a judge determines that it's right, then it's right. I just think that if
Right.
I was handicapping it, David, one or the
one would be
the-
better than the other. One is
Yeah.
more likely to succeed in a court than
Right.
the other. I get the impression from you, it's not 100 to 1. It's more like 65 to 35 or something in terms of the outcome. That's what I'm hearing from you. And then you're saying, so given that situation, it's a policy decision, and the planning board, if it wants to present this to town meeting, needs to decide what it thinks the policy should be. And if this fits, then fine, go ahead and present it. And if as a result of this conversation, they don't think so, then pull it and let's hash it out some more, or something like that. Is that a fair summary?
Well,
That's a summary as I see it,
you
because this board has to make a decision tonight whether to go forward with this article, because
Deadline is
Yeah.
Friday.
the deadline is Friday. And
So I'm going
Right.
to try to explain what I think I understand the addition of the new phrase in the first and last paragraphs mean. And I'm going to explain it like if I was trying to explain it to my friend across the street who knows I'm a town meeting member and a planning board member. Okay. I'm going to say to them that in this town, if you want to increase a nonconformity or create a new nonconformity, you have to get a variance, except if it's determined by the building commissioner that what you're proposing to build doesn't increase the nonconformity because it's not changing the building's relationship to an insufficient area. It's not changing the building's relationship to the insufficient frontage, and it's not changing the building's relationship to the setbacks. And when I say relationship, I mean it's a non-conforming relationship, as long as it doesn't change any of those things. And even if you want to add a new nonconformity, they have the right to say the building commissioner has the right to say that even when it's adding a new nonconformity, if it's doing one of these three things, it may be constructed, right?
well, no. I
Okay, so
mean,
that's how much I don't understand this.
if it's gonna add a new nonconformity, it's always gonna need a special permit under this bylaw as it exists and in the future.
Okay, so going to the first paragraph, it's just parsing out the sentence. Structures may be changed upon determination by the commissioner that such change does not increase the nonconforming or add a new nonconformity, right? That's what the building commissioner can say it's not a problem. Now, these things, the building commissioner can look to and say, these are things that don't increase the nonconformity, right? If the change is not going to, it's within all the setbacks, but it's located in a small lot, that's an existing nonconformity, right? The second one, oh God, I just.
Sally, maybe you could think about it as a decision tree.
Well, I was trying to do that.
Yeah,
Yes.
but I think so someone comes in with a project and the building commissioner has to determine whether it can go forward or not as by right or via special permit. So the first thing the building commissioner does is look at 1, 2, or 3. If any of those 3 things are true, then it's by right and that's it. If
So it
they're not-
complies with all the setbacks, coverage, and height, but it's located within a lot with a small area. He'd say,
all of those details, whatever those details are, none of those things actually say anything about increasing a nonconformity or adding a new nonconformity. They're just saying you're in a lot, it's nonconforming, whatever you're going to build is conforming, so you're okay. That's what 1, 2, and 3 say. However, if what you're doing does not fall under 1, 2, and 3, then the building commissioner says, does this nonconformity, is it substantially increasing the nonconforming nature? If the building commissioner says, no, it's de minimis, then it can go forward. However, if the building commissioner says, no, this is substantially increasing the nonconformity in some way, then it has to go to a special permit.
and at that point, the Board of Appeals would decide if it's substantially more detrimental.
Right.
And the clarification of adding that an addition of a new nonconformity is a trigger for that determination. That makes sense to me.
The addition, so in any case, every time you have a new nonconformity, it has to go to special permit. There's no out. And then it has to go to the ZBA. So the building commissioner cannot say, you know, if it's clearly a new nonconformity, it goes directly to the ZBA. There's for a special permit. There's no out. What this is saying is that the ZBA can allow the construction of a new nonconformity as long as it is not substantially more detrimental than the existing nonconformities via special permit.
And so an example of a new nonconformity, this is a house that's tight on the left side and the right side, and they decide that they want to put a little mud room off the right side and make it even tighter.
It's what we saw the other week, where they decided to put a stairwell to the basement.
That was the
one side of the
inch,
house.
yeah, it was 1 inch greater encroachment.
No. This is the one where they were.
This is the one on Manchester, I think, Sally.
Yeah. So they had a nonconformity on the right side of the property. It was too close. On the left side, they decided to put in a new stairwell into the basement, and that left side encroached for the first time onto the setback on the left side. So that was a new nonconformity. So the ZBA could say, this is a minimal, this is not substantially more detrimental than the existing nonconformity, and permit that. If you don't have this phrase in here, they would say that is a completely new nonconformity, therefore you must go to a variance, which would be the ZBA's preferred interpretation would be new nonconformities directly go to variance. The language that we have here says a new nonconformity may be allowed if it is not substantially more detrimental.
Okay.
So I wouldn't get caught up in the details of 1, 2, and 3. They essentially say, if you don't do anything that is newly nonconforming, then 1, 2, and 3, then you're okay.
And the structure may be constructed.
Yes.
I think it was really interesting for David to talk about the north side, because that was new information to me. And I'm trying to connect that new info about kind of not wanting to see that kind of development on the north side to what, to the, desire to not see this happen, to not see this new language. And I'm just trying to connect those two things. And I'm trying to, as Dia was saying too, I don't quite understand what the, I don't want to call it fear, but what the concerns are for those developments. And I just still don't understand. I mean, I think that is it because the north side has very small lot size requirements, or what is it about the north side that is triggering this renewal of looking at this is my question.
And actually, I Ching, if I can just pile on to your question, I'm wondering, even to that point, the new nonconformities that David was outlining that would create these presumably like larger, more valuable homes and eliminate the smaller, more affordable homes. Why wouldn't those fall into the category of substantially more detrimental and then be subject to, a push for a variance as opposed to a special permit by the Board of Appeals?
Well, it couldn't be pushed to a variance, but it could be denied.
Okay, got it. It would just be denied. Okay.
Yeah, if they don't like it, just deny it.
One thing that hasn't been said quite in these words is that, but it's been implied many times, everybody understands that there's a very wide difference between the likelihood of getting a variance and the likelihood of getting a special permit. So this is actually a big difference. If you're going to allow special permits, you have to accept the fact that in many, many cases, I'm guessing, I'm predicting, I can't prove it. In many, many cases, those are going to be approved, and some of them are going to be large. And any observer of what's going on in Winchester will understand that there's a lot of money coming into town, and there's a lot of money being placed on properties to try to enhance their value. And when you make it easy for that to happen, it's going to happen. If you make it easier, it's going to happen.
But it's
so that's how I see it. That's what I think is going to happen.
But if new nonconformities are already possible according to the previous interpretation of this language, then this is not a new change. We've already had the ability to put new nonconformities on these smaller lots, and yet it doesn't seem to have happened. So I think that saying that this may happen in the future, when we've had this, essentially the ability for this to have happened many years in the past, and it hasn't, especially since, Winchester's real estate bubble has been going on for quite some time. There's no evidence that people are taking advantage of the ability to put in new nonconformities now. So I don't know how you could extrapolate to the future. The past would say that there will be no new massive set of new nonconformities because the rules haven't really changed. With this new language, we're maintaining the old policy. The old policy hasn't led to inordinate numbers of people pushing the limits. So why should we think that it'll happen in the future? I don't follow that logic.
And so then the question is, because it says that we're specifically talking about existing non-conforming single and duplexes, and there's these activities that can be done upon them: reconstruct, extend, alter, structurally change. And it's the deal is, as long as none of those things add a new conformity. So this is not about a person coming to the building department and saying, I want to bump up my house, pump it up and make it so all of a sudden, non-conforming even more non-conforming than it is, what this first paragraph says is as long as they reconstruct and don't create any more nonconformities, then the building commissioner can give them a building permit. Is that right? That's what the first paragraph says. Even and they can't add any new nonconformities.
That's
for the
correct.
building permit to approve this, right? And then down below it says that the zoning board of appeals may approve it, including the addition of a new conformity, if they come to this qualitative decision.
So number one, Sally, is the lot area exception.
Right, I see insufficient area on the third
Right.
line.
And number one is where you already comply with all the setbacks and everything. Your only nonconformity is lot area.
Oh, I see. It's a tiny lot, but you stuck within your bounds.
And then you're changing it, but you're still not violating any setbacks. I mean, technically under the case law, that would be a special permit or could be a special permit. Here, it's like, hey, you comply with all your setbacks, the height, everything else. You're not changing any of that.
Right.
So you're good. You're good to go.
Right. And so then number two is a situation where the owner wants to come in and make a change to the structure that complies with all the setbacks and coverage and height.
That's the frontage exception. It's the same thing. It's just
okay. And then the
frontage.
third one is if the owner comes in and he says that the house encroaches on a setback, right? But the reconstruction will comply. I don't understand that.
The third one says that you can encroach on one or more of the required setback areas where the reconstruction itself, you're not changing anything on that side, and everything else that you're doing complies with everything else around the other side. So if you're encroaching on the left side and you're expanding on the right side, as long as you don't get into that setback, then you're good.
Right. And those would all be building commissioner approved permits.
By right.
Right. It's only that if somebody wants to take this house and modify it, including a new nonconformity, modify it in a way that will be
right. So so you would need a special permit if you were, again, let's stay with the same example because it's helpful. Let's say you were 2 feet into the left setback and you wanted to go 10 feet into the left setback. That's a special permit now.
Right.
That would be a special permit because you're exacerbating that nonconformity.
Right. And what would be in that instance in addition of a new nonconformity?
If you then if you were nonconforming on the left side and wanted to push out on the right side and you push into that right side setback.
And that would push it into a special permit at the Board of Appeals.
Right. And without this bylaw, it could be a variance, or under the Deirdre case, it would be a variance. So that this bylaw just kind of
and
changes
the impact of that difference is more freedom to build.
No, it's the impact of the difference is that it's between the bylaw and the case law is that a special permit's easier, has an easier standard or easier burden of proof than a variance.
Right. I'm just trying to trickle down to this is now this way, and people understand it, and they start getting building permits from the building commissioner to do all kinds of things that increase the density of the north end, and it decreases the distance between houses. And
Sally,
is that okay with us? Is that what this is doing? I'm trying to understand, that's all.
It's not changing that from the past practice.
All right.
Language does not change past practice.
Okay.
So if you were able to do previously, if you introduced a new nonconformity, you could go through the special permit process
and get permission to do so
if it was qualitatively less detrimental.
Well, substantially more or less. Yes, that's the word. Is not qualitative, but
the new language does not change that decision point.
And
Yeah,
David thinks that it does. David, you think that this will increase density and create hoses much closer together in the north end of town? Is that right, David?
I'm sorry, I've already described my view of this. It's
All right, well, I'm sorry to ask the repeated question again, never mind.
My view on that, Sally, would be if David ever felt that development in any area of town, or even within subsets of the same area of town, wasn't deserving of a special permit because it would be more detrimental to the neighborhood, they can deny it.
Right, okay.
I mean, the easiest way I can think of this is really making it terribly simple. Is that, let's say previously, no, I can't say it that way. The new language does not change the policy of whether
It simply
you need,
clarifies it.
It simply states it explicitly so that this language is now compliant with the recent case law.
Yeah.
So concerns about whether this will open up
Okay.
more development are concerns that we should have had prior to this discussion about, I mean, if we are uncomfortable with new nonconformities going through a special permit process, that possibility existed prior to this entire discussion about this language, because that's what the practice was.
So
you
then
could add new
why are you going to propose to town meeting to add Jay's language?
Because
it's so clear to you. It's so absolutely clear to you that this is what the policy is. Why are you proposing the change?
Because the Zoning Board of Appeals has a different interpretation of the language, and that is not a good situation. When the Zoning Board of Appeals disagrees with the town council about how to interpret this language, and the planning board voted to continue a policy and would like to see that policy continued, you have too many people, too many parties who don't see things the same way. So that's why I think the language has to be clarified. I mean, as Jay said, if you decide that you want to interpret this language, the existing language as saying you must have a variance, but previous practice of the town was such that you needed a special permit, people may get, they may sue the town and then it will go to court. So I just want everyone to understand the language the same way. And I want it to be clear so that we can all look at this and understand, so that everyone is on the same page.
So I think I understand this enough that I could explain it to a town meeting member.
Do we need to make a motion of any sort right now?
We would, if we wanted to move forward this to town meeting, we would have to move to put this forward to be on the warrant for town meeting. And this would be the language that we would have to use.
So are we continue to discuss this in some ways? Because we discussed this a couple weeks back.
We did.
It sounded like the policy of the board, and I can't remember if we made a motion to go forward on that policy, was to allow folks to continue to improve their residences and do these things, not by variance, because that, as David said, is a very different animal than a special permit, and that it makes it much harder. And so we are going by a policy to continue with what has been done before, which is to allow for special permits when you are adding to a new nonconformity.
When you are adding a new, when you
adding
add
a.
new nonconformity, you would be able to proceed with the special permit.
Right,
And
okay,
the board voted that the board can re-vote, but last fall, we voted to continue that policy.
okay. And so this new language from Mr. Tellerman is to clarify that. And so I would make a motion to put this language to town meeting. And is that a sufficient motion?
I think, yeah, to place this on the warrant as the language in front of us, yeah, I think that's sufficient.
So, so moved.
Is there a second?
Yeah, I think I would second it.
Okay. Typically, we would ask for further discussion, but I really think we've discussed this to death. So
Can I
would-
actually? I know we have beaten it to death, Diab. Can I just ask one question though? Because I'm just like,
You would,
don't
wouldn't you?
strangle me, everyone.
No, not at all. Tell us.
Remote, we can't.
Oh wait, I can't. You said because we're in the middle of a motion, I can't.
No, I'm saying.
No, we're discussing.
We're at a
Oh.
remote meeting, Kurt, so we can't strangle you. Go ahead.
Oh, got it. Yeah. You can just visually do it with your eyes.
Hey, we go like
so
this.
my only question is, I know, Diab, you're making the point that like, and I understand that practically speaking, this is like happening already, and we're just trying to do this to clarify. So the one thing I guess I'm just not fully appreciating is, when does adding a new nonconformity today result in a variance process as opposed to a special permit process?
Well, I think that's the discussion, Kurt, right? And in fairness to David, I think David has raised the question as to whether or not, when they've been faced with special permit applications, if they should actually be rerouted down the variance route.
Right.
And I don't think any of us have a concise history of any pattern along those lines. But I think I can't fault David for at least questioning that, given the Deirdre case, whether or not that should be the path.
One thing that happens procedurally, and I expect has happened a lot, and it just typically happens, is that when the Board of Appeals sits down to consider something, it's pre-cooked in a sense as being a special permit issue. And if you can picture the Board of Appeals sitting there with the special permit on the table, special permit application on the table, it would be unusual. I'm guessing, because I've only been doing this for a year or two, but it would be unusual and not something that people sitting at that table would want to do, to say, oh, wait a minute, this is not a special permit, this is a variance, because that's not how people think. By the time it's gotten there, it's been through the clerk, it's been through the building inspector, and it comes there, and you sort of look at it and say, okay, well, it's a special permit. And so to say that, well, I don't need to go any further. That's what actually happens. That's the reality of it, in my view.
But now I think what we're saying is, by making this change, we're sort of codifying that, like, adding a nonconformity is not a variance process.
In fact, it can even be as a
special permit process.
It can even be as of right, Kurt.
No.
I don't agree with the as of right piece, but
no, but it says that they may be built if the building commissioner determines that such changes do not increase the non-conforming nature or add a new conformity. Oh,
yes,
okay.
I think it's saying they can't, so it can't be built if it's adding a new nonconformity, is how I read that.
Yes, a new nonconformity has to go through with the special.
Oh, because there's a does not in the middle of the sentence. Correct. I get it. Okay. Right. So he would kick it.
But I think it is effectively eliminating the variance process as it relates to adding new conformities and codifying the fact that new nonconformities are now subject to special permit in all cases. Correct.
It is making it the bright line rule, no ambiguity.
So I mean that's what we have to decide. Like, is that how we want new nonconformities to be handled? Is that the process? Got it.
Well, the new nonconformity when it goes to special permit, it is subject to being determined if it's substantially more detrimental.
Exactly. And so that I think
And
is
at
the
that
debate
point,
that Deb and David were having, which is, like, I think David's concerned that just like general tendencies, like human nature, people maybe don't want to push back on some of those things. And so we're putting a lot of faith in the Board of Appeals to really effectively evaluate what is more detrimental, I guess.
And keep in mind that the board changes all the time. People coming and going.
Sure.
So
Yes.
clarity is important. I just would advocate for the opposite result than the one that's being proposed here for reasons that I've given.
Which is, David, that if we do not explicitly state that adding a new nonconformity can't be done. I mean, basically what what the perspective of the variance would be that don't even think of coming to us with something that would increase a new nonconformity. I mean, that would increase an existing that would add a new nonconformity. Yeah, is that what you're saying?
Actually, let's talk about that for a moment. Somebody on the Board of Appeals went back and looked. You can't find the decisions. There's no way to find them. You can't search for them. But he went back and looked at the last year and a half, and there were 3 variance matters that came before the Board of Appeals, and all 3 were granted. All 3 of the variances were granted. So
But David, that's not the point on variances entirely. So, and I'm not advocating one way or the other.
Right.
The concern with variances isn't just that they're hard to get, and they are hard to get. And if you granted 3, that's 3 more than most boards grant. The concern is that if an abutter appeals the grant of a variance, they're almost always going to be successful in that appeal.
Is that because there's only 3 very narrow reasons why
you can't defend them?
grant
The statute is so screwed up, Sally. There's like no way to really meet the standard.
I'm sorry, Jay, you're absolutely right. It has to do with the fact that you can never succeed on appeal.
Which means that adding a new nonconformity under special permit is kind of what's going to happen anyway.
Well, no, because if you had a standard that said you need a variance, then in terms of what could be appealed successfully, you wouldn't successfully get variances.
Oh, I see. Yes, right.
You wouldn't successfully get them.
You'd
And
never get it at
therefore-
appeal. Right.
Yeah. And that's why I made the point that and I understand Jay's point, absolutely understand it. But there's nuance here that doesn't come across. It's either all black or all white in the wording of the bylaw.
Well,
And that
should be.
that doesn't take account of the fact that when somebody builds a stoop on the left side of their house and encroaches by 3 inches, maybe that's not a big concern. And therefore, maybe, it shouldn't require the variance. But if somebody wants to build a substantial addition off to the other side of the property, you have concern. You have concern that the Board of Appeals, as it changes personnel, will find, they're just not going to push back. And whereas with a variance, it's a pretty strong situation. That's what we're talking about here. That's the whole issue here.
We're talking about whether you can trust the board to do, but the law is full of, reasonable. The word reasonable appears a lot in your law. I happen to live with someone who went to law school, and I remember all these things about a reasonable person, nobody has defined what a reasonable person is, but somehow we all know what a reasonable person is. And the law is full of these things which depend upon people being reasonable and doing that. And so I'm just, we can always find, I don't know how we can,
I think we're done here. I think you should go ahead and vote on the motion.
Yeah,
we're just chit-chatting.
So Kurt, your question, was it answered? Was it
Yes.
asked? Okay.
Yes. Thank you.
So at the time, I think we had a second, we had a first and a second. So if there's no further discussion, shall we go to a vote?
Yes.
And a roll call vote. The motion was to move forward with this language. Sally,
Well, I'll say yes.
okay. Kirk,
Aye.
Yi Ching,
Aye.
and I say aye as well. So that is 4-0 with one abstention. Unfortunately, Nick wasn't able to be here.
Absent, not abstent.
Absent, I'm sorry, 4-0 with one absent. So is that 4-0-0-1? I don't know how you count it. So thank you everyone very much. I really appreciate your hanging out in this late hour. I'm sure everyone had much better things to do for the last half hour. But
Here's my cheat sheet for the order of votes. Can you read it?
Yeah, in favor, opposed, abstaining, and absent. Okay.
This is Sally's law book on the Scotch
Sally,
tape.
I think you misspelled your last word there.
Oh, abstain.
Oh, abstain. Oh, okay.
Oh, absent. No, absent. Yeah, whatever.
Yeah. So thank you, Jay. I think we lost David already.
Oh, I'm sure we did.
Town planner hiring. I think we haven't yet set the date. We will do that as soon as possible. I haven't looked at the calendar.
Diab, stay on with me after and you can help me find that meeting.
Yeah.
Chimp or whatever it's called.
Our members is going to be unavailable for the rest of the week. So the earliest will be possibly this weekend or Monday.
All right.
And there's no way around that. They're going in, so they will not be available. So that's it for the hiring update. Action items, I don't know what they are. I think we should, I would really welcome a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye, we don't need a roll call on that. So we are adjourned for 2 weeks. Yay, we get a week off. Let's see. Thank you to Nancy Palcari, our recording secretary. Thank you, Brian Manter, for sticking with us. Thank you to Richard Lee from the, where are you from these days? Chamber of Commerce. Thanks to WinCam for all of their work recording us. Thanks to you folks out there in TV land, and we will see you in a couple of weeks. Everyone, please remember to go vote. Very important. Go vote. Okay.
Okay, Diab, you stay on with me for just 2 minutes and I'll find this thing.